Kenji, a meticulously ordinary man in his late 30s, had always found solace in the daily rituals of his life in Oita. His job as an accountant was predictable, his apartment tidy, and his evenings usually consisted of a quiet meal and a book. But his true sanctuary was the local bathhouse, the steam filled haven where the day's anxieties seemed to melt away. One sweltering July evening, after a particularly draining day of spreadsheets and client calls, Kenji settled onto a low bath stool in front of the communal taps. It was unremarkable at first glance. A simple, worn plastic stool, the kind found in every public bathhouse across Japan. Yet, the moment he sat, a profound sense of ease washed over him. The curve of the seat perfectly cradled him, the height ideal, the plastic strangely supple against his skin. It was, quite simply, the perfect bath stool. From that day on, Kenji couldn't get the stool out of his mind. He found himself arriving earlier at the bathhouse, hovering near the stool storage, a small thrill igniting in his chest when he managed to claim it. He started to recognize its subtle scuffs and faded blue hue. Soon, his obsession began to seep into his everyday life. He'd be walking down the street and suddenly his eyes would lock onto a small, low object, a discarded bucket, a planter, a child's toy. And for a fleeting, disorienting second, it would morph into his beloved bath stool. He found himself contorting into strange positions in public, trying to replicate the feeling of sitting on it, much to the amusement and then growing concern of passersby. His friends, a close-knit group he'd known since university, began to notice Kenji's increasingly peculiar behavior. Casual conversations would inevitably loop back to the stool, its unparalleled comfort, its inexplicable perfection. He started carrying a small, worn towel with him everywhere, just in case he found a stool to sit on, be it a public bench, a low wall, or even a stack of old newspapers. He'd meticulously wipe it down, settle himself, and close his eyes in blissful contentment, oblivious to the stares. Invites to izakayas and baseball games grew less frequent. Calls went unanswered. When he did see his friends, their smiles seemed strained, their eyes darting away whenever he brought up his latest discovery. He was losing them, he knew, but he couldn't understand why. He was just sharing his joy, wasn't he? Months passed, and the loneliness began to gnaw at him. One evening, his oldest and most patient friend, Takashi, messaged him out of the blue. "Kenji, can I come over? It's been too long." Kenji's heart lifted. Finally, someone who still cared. He cleaned his apartment meticulously, even setting out his favorite teacups. When Takashi arrived, the initial awkwardness quickly dissolved into comfortable chatter about work and old times. Eventually, Kenji, emboldened by Takashi's familiar presence, decided to unburden himself. "Takashi," he began, "I don't know what's happening. My friends, they're avoiding me. I think it has something to do with this." He gestured proudly towards the corner of his living room. "This stool. It's truly incredible. It's changed my life. I found it at the bathhouse. Now, well, I find it everywhere. I sit on it and all my worries disappear." He walked over to the designated spot, a small clearing in front of his low coffee table, and with a flourish, he sat down. He settled himself, a sigh of pure contentment escaping his lips. "See," he said, beaming up at Takashi. "Isn't it just perfect? The way it supports your back, the angle." Takashi lowered his phone, his hand trembling, his face pale. He looked at the screen, then at Kenji, then back at the screen. His voice was a strained whisper, barely audible above the sudden, ringing silence in the room. "Kenji, there's no stool in the picture." The words struck Kenji like a physical blow. He blinked, a slow, dawning horror twisting his features. He looked at Takashi's phone, then down at the space directly beneath him. The place where the perfect curve of the stool had so undeniably cradled him moments before. His eyes widened, fixing on the bare wooden floorboards. Yet he was still sitting. He could still feel the cool, smooth plastic against his skin, the familiar give and support beneath his weight. His muscles were tensed in the familiar posture, his feet flat on the ground as if braced against a non-existent base. A cold dread, far more profound than any comfort the stool had offered, began to seep into his bones. He tried to shift, to stand, but his body seemed locked in place, held by an invisible force, by a memory of contact that was no longer real. A low, guttural sound escaped his throat, a strangled whimper of disbelief and terror. Takashi took a step back, his phone falling from his numb fingers to clatter softly on the floor. His gaze was fixed on Kenji, on the man who sat perfectly still, mid-air, a horrifying rictus of realization contorting his face. "Kenji?" Takashi whispered again, his voice cracking. Kenji didn't answer. He just sat there, suspended, his eyes wide and vacant, staring through the non-existent stool and into a terrifying, boundless emptiness. The only sound in the room was Kenji's ragged, shallow breathing and the almost imperceptible scrape of his bare skin against the hard, empty air where his perfect stool had been. He wasn't on the floor, he was simply there, and it was clear in that horrifying moment that a part of him had just gone utterly, irrevocably somewhere else entirely.